Welcome to this special broadcast of CNBC Africa's coverage of the 42nd annual meeting of the World Economic Forum here in Davos, Switzerland. Now, the 2012 annual meetings took place against the backdrop of the European sovereign debt crisis and continuing concerns about the health of the global economy. Now, Europe's woes only served to burnish Africa's investment credentials. So we caught up with a number of African government and business leaders and asked them about their strategies of trying to position Africa to take advantage of the difficulties that Europe is facing. Since 1971, the World Economic Forum has been setting the global economic agenda for the year ahead. It's also been a breakthrough platform for peace deals, political breakthroughs, and even launching aid projects around the world. The theme for 2012 was Great Transformations, Shaping New Models. And I spoke to Lee Howell, Managing Director of WEF, about the WEF and Africa's focuses.
Let's just pan out a little bit. First, this is the year 7 billion people arrived on the planet. Never happened before in human history. We really don't know what that means, and we're on the trajectory to what, 10, 12, 13 billion within at least our children's lifetime. So we don't understand that future, so that's a transformation. We've never seen that happen, never experienced that. Then you put that in context, and within that, within our planet, absolutely right. We're seeing economic wealth shift to new parts of the world. But let's be also very clear. It's going to India and China, certainly. But just we've lost our sense of time. 300 years ago, they were the center of the economic universe. It was the rest of the world, the Western Hemisphere, that was underdeveloped. It's shifting. But more fundamentally, there's a demographic piece to this, and that is to say there are large parts of the world where young people are doing their best to get educated, have an opportunity, and they're not seeing the future opportunities that maybe the parents or grandparents had. And that's not just unique to, you know, it's actually shared. I mean, you know, and you see high GDP growth, places like Africa has the GDP growth that's the envy of the rest of the world at the moment. But the employment growth is trailing, and particularly among young. Similarly, in Europe, you have in Spain, young people still trying to understand how they're going to go forward. And also on the other extreme, on the demographics, you have a number of countries, China, for example, Japan, United States, Italy. Larger numbers of retirees are going to leave the workforce. Yet the social costs and the recurrent costs, it's really unsure how that's going to be financed, because in part, their societies, they have more old people than younger people, and they're seeing a shrinkage, and that's a first in history. So big transformations, hard to get our hands around, but it's starting to play out in very different in very different ways across the world, and we need to come together and at least share notes and try to understand what it means, and hopefully that exchange may lead to some solutions that applying in one part of the world could apply to the other part of the world.
We also caught up with the South African finance and trade and industry ministers and asked them about the assessment of the European debt crisis impact on Africa and how the continent could profit from Europe's economic woes. As South Africa, do you support the IMF coming in with extra funds for on passing to Europe?
I think if it's necessary, yes. I think the IMF needs to bolster its resources. We're living in a world where globalization is a reality, where you require better and more effective global governance. The IMF is one of those institutions that can actually provide that. However, there are still serious questions about the voice and representation of developing countries in the IMF. Notwithstanding that, it needs whatever support it can get in order that we don't totally collapse in this environment.
But the problem is, of course, if they are going to raise the money, that means they have to come to countries such as South Africa, who are members of the IMF, to put in the extra resources. How do you explain to the African voter, viewer, that we have to rescue Europe? Why can't we just allow them to default?
Because all of our economies are connected to Europe. It's like your neighbor's house burning down. And the danger is that if you don't help them put out that fire will spread to your house. Already you can feel the smoke, you can feel a few pieces of timber landing in your yard, and so if you ignore it completely, the possibility is you lose your house as well. So we are an interconnected world, so that's the first point. The second point is that we are small economies, relatively speaking.
But we need every little bit of money that we have got.
But the real big people who have lots of cash in the bank are, for example, the Chinese, who have $3.2 trillion in the bank, so to speak. And it is those major countries that have surpluses, like China, like Japan, Korea, Brazil, who will have to make some decisions about how much are they willing to contribute. But also, nobody just contributes for the fun of it. They also contribute so that they get something out of it. And I suppose those are things that we will see as we go.
Let's talk more now about the impact that Europe is going to have potentially on South Africa's growth prospects. Now, we've seen a number of economists revising their economic growth figures lower from the Treasury. What are we looking at? Have you had to relook at numbers?
We are relooking at the moment. We have our budget on the 22nd of February where we will announce our numbers, but clearly we're heading below 3%. And so it's affecting jobs, it's affecting enterprises, it's affecting exports of manufactured goods, exports of some of our commodities, which is the same as the rest of Africa as well. And the only saving grace is the demand created by China, India in particular. And they are going to be major factors in global economic growth as we go forward.
Well, I don't know whether it's a question of taking advantage of Europe's problems, but actually of showing the world that while there are problems in Europe, which will no doubt rebound on the world economy and on all of us, and we would like to see those minimized, there are some important positive stories taking place in the world economy. And definitely Africa and the emerging world is part of that. And I think there's a growing recognition that the hope of economic recovery does lie in the dynamic parts of the world economy, which are now the emerging markets, and the African continent is now becoming recognized as a very significant source of opportunity for them moving further forward and consolidating the growth processes in that part of the world.
So the strategy lies in telling the good stories that are surrounding Africa. Now, I know you've been attending various sessions. In the morning, you attended a session that was talking about integrating regional economies in Africa. And you've also just finished now attending one session where you were talking about manufacturing. Give us a sense of some of the takeaways that you have had from those conversations.
Well, I think the conversation about regional integration is something that Africa's talked about for a long time, but I think there's some very, very important and very strategic concrete steps which are now underway. Immediately there is the tripartite process, which is the SADC East African Community, COMESA, combined free trade agreement, which was mandated by the heads of state at the summit last year in South Africa. And the full negotiating session for the free trade agreement will begin next month. And I think that this is a tremendously important venture. It will create a regional market of around about 700 million people, a combined GDP of $1 trillion US. And it will be countries from Cape to Cairo, quite literally on the east coast of the continent. We've agreed that we need to combine that within the perspective of development integration with efforts to improve the infrastructure, of which the North-South Corridor is the major flagship project, and also with cooperation around the real economy, which is an area we have not yet worked on. But I think that if we get this right, we will be starting to consolidate the growth spurt that Africa has been experiencing into a real developmental effort, which will create the conditions for us to support value-added production.
How do we do that, Minister?
Well, I think we have to, first of all, identify the opportunities, and I think those opportunities are very much around the fact that we will be growing our internal market, and also that we will have the benefits and opportunities of cooperation. For example, all of us, many of us, have got mineral products which we're exporting unprocessed. We need to negotiate with countries of destination to invest in beneficiation or degrees of beneficiation in our own countries. That is happening to some extent, but I think we have a much better negotiating prospect as a combined African bloc. And we need to do the same in agricultural products, turn agricultural products into processed food products. That's where the revenue is, and the revenue at the moment, which is not coming into our own economy.
Now, according to figures compiled by KPMG, Africa yesterday was trending. And in fact, Africa has been one of the buzzwords here at the 42nd annual meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos. Now, it is a marketer's dream. Wherever you go, people are talking about Africa as the next investment frontier. And with us now to try and chat around some of those issues that are coming up and how a marketer can try and take advantage of that is Mila Matola, CEO of Brand South Africa. Mila, thanks for your time. As I said, this is a marketer's dream. Wherever you walk around, you hear people talking. What you hear consistently is the message of positiveness around Africa. What have you been hearing?
Godfrey, Africa's image is increasingly improving, and what we are hearing, the sentiment out there is that Africa's time has come, and Africa is the next growth story, and there's huge interest in seeing how Africa can also contribute towards the debates around finding new models of sustainable growth.
Absolutely. So now from your perspective, now you interact of course with South African businessmen who are coming here. We are interacting with African business people, political leaders coming out of Africa as well as other global leaders. Give us a sense of some of the issues that they are raising.
We had a roundtable with a number of leaders, business leaders and government leaders as Brand South Africa. And what's coming through there is that Africa needs to increase its profile and position in the world. It needs to focus on increasing regional economic integration and ensuring that it can take advantage of this huge interest that is now being focused on South Africa.
Right. So let's talk about
South Africa as well as Africa.
Sure, because part of the conversation really, it's no longer just South Africa and Africa, yes. It's very much Africa. I attended a roundtable yesterday where there was a discussion around what role Africa as a continent can play on global stage, and increasingly what you heard is that it's about Africa. Now, from your perspective, so what initiatives then do you take to try and take advantage of the current positive vibes that are emanating around Africa?
Look, as Brand South Africa, Godfrey, we have to influence and inform the conversations about where South Africa should be going and taking advantage of this increased interest on the continent. Sure. But we also have to communicate that. And part of what we're doing is communicating this positive interest that is being focused on the continent and South Africa. I think what is interesting is that it was mentioned in one of the roundtables that Africa could also serve as the food basket for the world, and it is important that we start focusing on issues such as agriculture to help drive that. And I think there's increasingly a view that with regional economic integration, Africa will not only enhance its own competitiveness, ensure that it develops regional supply chains as well as value chains, but also taps into this huge interest in the continent.
So how do we project this image of Africa across the globe as one entity? You are working as Brand South Africa. How do you bring the other then organizations that are talking around the positivity of Africa from other parts of the continent?
Well, we liaise with all other entities that are responsible for marketing their own countries. But I think for us what is important is that we enhance the profiling and positioning of Africa, the continent, in terms of increased democratization on the continent, but the opportunities that also exist on the continent. I mean, 60% of arable land you find on the continent here. The continent is rich in terms of resources and mineral resources and others, and we need to, in a very systematic way, ensure that we profile these opportunities to the world, but say that we need to find new models in exploring these assets. And I think in that regard, we should learn from what's happening in the Eurozone. Sure. Regional economic integration is important, but let us also learn from what's happening in the Eurozone as we move forward.
When we come back after the break, we take a look at how business leaders are matching the rhetoric of talking about investing in Africa with real money in the ground.